Hey there, happy Wednesday, everyone, and thanks for joining us at FormFest. This session is kicking off for connecting forms to CRMs, EHRs, QuickBooks, Docusign, and more, where we're going to dive into utilizing the Form Assembly Webhook connector. Obviously, we'll give it a couple minutes just to let everybody roll in from other sessions, other daily activities. We'll also get introductions kicked off and roll through a little poll just to kind of get a feel for how many folks have heard of, used, or maybe have a ton of familiarity with the webhook connector we're going to look at today. I'll go ahead and run through introductions for us. As this session will be ran today by myself, Justin Benton, and Tom Gooding, who'll be joining in shortly. And Tom and I have actually both worked a few different roles, worn a few different hats at Form Assembly, but the intersection that they've always sat at has been helping customers and prospects solve technical problems, oftentimes with sophisticated solutions that we'll look at today with that webhook connector. So we're both really excited to discuss the topics today and really stoked to have everybody joining us. Now, like I mentioned, I want to kick off with a poll because we have the webhook connector currently, but we also have what we used to call the HTTPS connector that some Form Assembly customers may be familiar with as well. So I want to launch a poll and just ask, is this something that everyone here has heard of, utilized before, or familiar with? Or is this something that, maybe this is my first time interacting with it today? So take a moment, grab that coffee, check out the poll. And I also like to mention that we should have some time towards the end for Q&A, but any questions along the way, drop them in. We're going to be doing our best to hold on to those towards the end of the session, but then also follow up after the session for any questions that didn't get answered or maybe couldn't get answered or just deserved a little more time than this session allowed. Probably just a couple more seconds on the poll since it looks like a lot of folks are jumping in. But again, just trying to gauge that familiarity level that everyone might be coming into with regarding that webhook connector. I'll go ahead and switch us over to the poll results, as it looks like we have some folks and some teams that have familiarity here. Looks like we have some people that definitely have either heard of it, maybe used it or seen it, or just understand the concept behind it. But then definitely the majority of us are here to learn, which is what I'm really excited for, because this is one of those things that usually there's some education needed. There's some enablement that really helps you get closer to the impact. But once you understand the webhook connector and once you start seeing those use cases pop up for how you can make the most of it, you're really off to the races. As a quick overview, I guess underview at this point, but what we're going to cover today is going to be, again, a quick understanding of what is the Form Assembly webhook connector. We'll take a look at how to use that webhook connector and what type of Form Assembly users is this designed for. And then Tom is going to run us through a live demo later on, where we're going to take a look at how to configure the webhook connector inside Form Assembly. And we should be able to even take a look at that data connecting to Microsoft Power Automate in a live setting. And then we'll take a quick look at the impacts, benefits, and some examples of how you could utilize this connector today with your team. Like I mentioned as well, a little Q&A to wrap up, but drop those questions in all along the session today. And if they pop up after the session, we're always here to answer. At a high level, and to start off, it's critical to understand what are webhooks if we're going to use the webhook connector. And the way I like to always describe it is webhooks are really just a way that you can send data to and from locations on the internet. If a URL is an address on the web to host a web page, think of a webhook as a URL designed for sending data or receiving data. And this is usually going to be driven by events. And in the case of Form Assembly, you can probably guess it's usually going to be a form submission, but you'll see all types of events kicking off webhooks. And if you've utilized platforms like Zapier or even worked with a ton of different AI tools today that operate with webhooks, you're probably familiar with the different types of interactions that can kick off and drive webhook events. This connector is very similar to connectors you may already work with and utilize today, like our payment connectors, Salesforce connector, Google and Microsoft Suite connectors, but it is a little different. I like to say it's the same because obviously you need to have a little familiarity and knowledge with that platform or whatever you're connecting to, but also in that form assembly is going to understand the relationship as intuitively as it can. But it's different because this is a little more flexible. If you're using a Salesforce connector, the data is going to Salesforce. But a webhook connector allows you to send data to really anywhere across the web that you have access to and can accept data via webhook. And so that means there's a little more that goes into maybe the configuration or maybe how you even send the data when it comes to the structure of the payload and the when and how it's sent. But that flexibility is also the power and the impact, because it means you get to really control, okay, what happens in this full process. Now, like I mentioned, it's a little different from our other connectors, but it's still designed for folks that have form assembly and have a problem to solve that can be solved with webhooks. And so really all you need to utilize this connector is going to be access to obviously form assembly and access to this workflow step via the permissions and your plan, as well as some technical familiarity with how to work with the system you're trying to send data to, and then just setting up the webhooks. We'll take a look, later on at setting up those webhooks, and it's usually something that even introductory knowledge to how these works has more than enough for you to be able to set these up. And as always, I like to mention that we have support, enablement, documentation, and a ton of guidance otherwise to make sure that on the form assembly side, you're covered and feel confident in configuring these things. Now, to get started using this webhook connector, what you'll need as your full recipe list is going to be the endpoint URL of the system that you're working with. Oftentimes this is going to be found from the platform. So for instance, with Microsoft Power Automate, you would find this inside Microsoft Power Automate. And there's going to be different types of authorizations that are available with form assembly. And so that may be something that is up to you as a matter of preference, or it may be something that is a matter of stipulation required by the system or platform you're sending the data to. But I always like to point out that you have those options with form assembly, ranging from jumping in right away all the way to high level security, needing some additional information to be sent along with it. And then you also have access to different content types and formats for sending that data over. And that's going to mean you can do something as simple as URL encoded or form data, which is connecting the dots like you see in most of the form assembly connectors, where this form field equals this slot of wherever the data is being sent. Or you can go as far as to set up a custom JSON or like raw payload. So a lot of options available here. Again, maybe a matter of preference or a matter of stipulation, but that flexibility is often the impact here for form assembly webhook users. Here are some example use cases that we're already seeing form assembly customers leverage that workflow connector, or sorry, that webhook connector for inside workflows. And these are broken down obviously by different departments, teams, and scenarios, because rarely, just like you're not approaching a form with the goal of having a form filled out, the form serves a greater purpose. The goal of the webhook connector is never just to utilize webhooks, it's to achieve a greater purpose, a bigger project. And oftentimes it looks like, okay, how do I connect marketing data to other marketing platforms? Especially when it comes to campaign management, or again, thanks everyone for joining us at FormFest today, but how do we get folks, after they fill out a form, registered via something like Zoom? Or this is where we can start pulling in broader operations systems, like ClickUp, MuleSoft, Asana, as well as other key steps like E-Signiture that are available inside form assembly, but just maybe ran through other platforms, given your team's processes. This is the time where I'd like to shift the microphone over to my colleague and good friend Tom, as he's going to run us through that live demo of setting up that connector, or taking a look at the connector inside form assembly as it gets ready to send data over to Microsoft Power Automate.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Justin, and apologies, everyone. I entered late, but I'm here, and so I'm sure Justin has given you all the information you needed from a high level. So now I'm going to walk you through setting it up on the workflow itself. So bear with me as I get the screen ready. Okay, so here we are. So I do have a workflow built out. I actually had two. Today we're going to use the backup one just to get things shown for the demonstration. So as Justin's mentioned, the webhook is sort of a catch-all, allows you to connect to many different systems that have endpoints you can send information to using different sort of formats, whether it's JSON payload, form data, raw form data, or and it also has to have different authentication methods. So we're not looking for just a normal open-ended endpoint. It can support OAuth authentication using the response authorization code flow. We can also support API keys, and we can support password basic authentication. So in this workflow, we've got a simple layout. We've got a form that's then going to go to the thank you page, and then we have the webhook connector. So we're going to have this run after the forms are submitted. You'll add the webhook step, and here you've got a few tabs. The description is what it says on the tin. This is where you'll write what it does. So if you're sending to a specific system, well, then you could say sending to SharePoint list, whatever you want to put in there. Then over here on the authorization tab, this is where you'll set up your authorization. Once you've set it up once, it can be reused and over and over again for that user's account. Here I've got it set to none currently, but if I go to new authorization, you'll see that we can give it a name, and the authorization types that are supported are the OAuth basic and API key. When you set up the OAuth, it'll ask you things that you expected, so client ID, secret, etc., etc. You'll set that up on whatever system you're looking to send the information to then complete that flow. And what you'll do is you'll click connect, it'll pop up the window, you'll sign in, and then it will store that. If we just cancel out that. Next, we have the configuration tab, which I'll come back to in a moment. I just want to quickly cover before I forget the error handling tab. So if your endpoint was to send back an error, what do you want to do? We can actually jump to a different step in the workflow. So we could actually purposely build out a always true type path. And if there's an error, let's go down the other way. And you could have different pages or actions happening based on that error. Coming back to the configuration tab, you'll see here we have actions. You can add as many actions as you want. They can be renamed. And here is where we'll set up what we're sending to. So in today's demonstration, we're going to actually send to a Power Automate. We'll have an endpoint there that's expecting the JSON data. And then what it does on the Power Automate side, once it receives it, it then puts it into a list. So now I'm integrating these two systems together. I'm able to have a nice front end with Form Assembly's workflow and push that over to Power Automate, as well as any of the other connectors that we have native integrations for as well. So it's not just one system only, you can do many within a workflow. So here are the options we've got: post, patch, put, get. Currently it's only supported for those pushing information. So you got your patches, you put, and your post. And then you'll put in the endpoint that you're sending to. So here I've got my Power Automate endpoint, which I do have open here somewhere. So here you can see I've got a Power Automate flow. Won't get into this too much, but I'd expect whoever has this product to know what they're doing. Here I've set up the endpoint to receive what I'm looking to come from Form Assembly. I've got a condition that's just checking that the API key matches what I'm sending. If it's true, it'll let it in. If not, it will do an error. And what it does is then creates an item and sends back a success response. So on the Power Automate side, that's all we needed to do. Here in my list on SharePoint, you can see currently is empty. So in here, what we're going to do on the webhook, we're going to push over JSON, and there's the custom headers section where we can add the header. So here I've added a custom header of API key and then put in this, as that's what my Power Automate is looking for. And then if we scroll down, we then have the body. Here, it's not a question of I need to send everything. You can choose what you want to send to your endpoint. So that's the beauty of the webhook, is not only do you have the flexibility of sending it to an authenticated endpoint using OAuth, etc., but you also have a choice of what you want to send. Here, I'm going to send project name, last name, email. These strings here, these words here that you can see that are in a bubble, these are actually form fields. So I'm actually able to say, well, I'm going to send over these key value pair of project name. I can select any field from my form, and then that will insert that. So now the data is dynamic. I'm going to send over what I want to send. but maybe all of these are for a certain project. Maybe I want to append on the end of it 2026 because it's always going to be that. You get to choose what you want to put in there. You can use form fields or repeated fields, so you can put those both in there. And if I want to just send any other information, I can do if I just want to manually sort of statically set that data. And that's it. There's many different systems you can connect to. So there's a few different systems that we've proven for, things like MuleSoft that we've sent to. We've had people using Epic system to send certain things to. So it all comes down to the system you're sending to, but this does give a lot more flexibility than what we previously had. I'll show you how this quickly looks. Again, this is the backup one, so it doesn't look as great as one I pre-prepared. But either way, you'll see what happens. So here we're looking to add the project. So let's do FormFest 2026. These other fields are not actually named the same, so these can just be test, as I'm not actually sending those. I submit my form. Now, whatever is dictated by the workflow, it was a thank you page. That's what I got. And in the background, we're going to go ahead and do the Webhook connector, which is sending to my Power Automate. If we come in here, we can see we've got the green check mark, so it's gone through successfully. We come to the response. We can actually check the logs, and we'll be able to see that we've got the 200 success on the Webhook part. And you can see there is that. If we come over to here and give a refresh, we should see now we've got that entry in our SharePoint list. So this opens the door for many different use cases. Obviously, I would have sent over more data points. So I could have sent over project owner, department, etc. That was on the previous demo that was meant to be shown. But just to show you that you can push the information over, and you can see it here, it is working. The Power Automate did receive the data. And really, it's just the flexibility of how we can use that webhook to send to any system. So as I mentioned before, we've got a few proven out integrations using the webhook. We've had people send to Monday CRM. We've had things like ClickUp involved, many different endpoints that we can send to on CRMs that maybe we don't have an integrated connection for. And even people are using things like API gateways from AWS. They're able to set up their own endpoint they want to send to. This can push there, and now you can move it wherever you want within your own sort of Amazon environment as well. So I think that's everything I needed to get through in regards to showing the webhook. I'll pass it back to Justin, and obviously any questions at the end we can definitely help take as well.
As always, no notes, invaluable, Tom, and we appreciate it. No, that was a perfect walkthrough of how to set up that webhook connector inside Form Assembly, as well as, again, how to watch that data push from the connector after form response all the way into that Microsoft environment. And I definitely want to call out that we see folks utilize this in a variety of ways, because this is going to be something that you can leverage in addition to the other connectors. You know, ton of benefits for utilizing this, because this means that I may be sending a file that's captured via the SharePoint connector, but what if I need to also interact with Power Automate to trigger something inside my Microsoft environment? Or what if I want to send, you know, other things? Because I believe we actually had a few questions about files and the webhook connector, and the flexibility that you're going to get from this is not just that form data being able to be sent, but also response variables that Form Assembly provides out of box for you. And that's going to include links to any files that are captured and, you know, held by Form Assembly, because obviously those uploads are held within your Form Assembly instance. And so there's ways that you can get that data and then other key data like response values, IP addresses, submission dates, and more, all the way over to those endpoints without having to craft anything. There's also going to be ways that you can really make sure to manage any sensitive data, because this is where we always like to call out that obviously if you're sending data to Salesforce, we all can have a pretty good understanding of the security level and expectations for Salesforce when it comes to any data that you have that might be sensitive. However, that flexibility of the webhook connector does mean you're sending data to possibly anywhere that you're setting it up to accept it. So that opens the door a little more, but the control is always at your fingertips. You're always able to say, regardless of where I'm sending it, I can control obviously the endpoint, but what's being sent. As Tom walked through, the payload is fully customizable. Any fields that you have in your form can be included or can be excluded if they shouldn't be there. You can also modify the way that that data is captured if you need to anonymize anything or just make adjustments for those types of considerations. There's also ways that you can set up custom error messaging and rerouting, because there's the scenario that you may expect something to not work out or send properly, or you may not want it to send in some cases, but now you still have the control of what comes next in that user experience. Because maybe that data isn't meant to be sent, depending on how the form's filled out, but now you can reroute that person to a different thank you page or back to the form to readdress whatever the problem was in the first place. Again, always about flexibility and making sure that you have the control over what's happening in that process. Taking a full look through some of these integrations, this is going to be things that, or these are going to be some things that we've seen customers already set up. And so if there's any that you're not seeing on this list, let us know. If there's something you're seeing on this list and you want more info on how customers are using it, let us know. Or if you have things that you're saying, wait a second, I'm connecting 3 different platforms with the Webhook connector that aren't on here, please let us know in that case. But this is going to be a list that we want to see grow over time, because the goal of, again, that Webhook connector is the flexibility to get that data to anywhere you need to. And these are things that, while they are also subject to obviously these endpoints, because at the end of the day, something like ClickUp or Asana or Adobe Sign, they control their own ability to accept webhooks. Their platforms usually only grow whenever they interact with things like, web form solutions, things like form assembly. So oftentimes we see those ecosystems grow, the more we can all become aware of what's being solved as we all step into the room and collaborate on sophisticated solutions. And we're always here to field those questions, help out where we can, and enable your team however possible. Perfect segue, unintentionally at this point, on the next poll that I wanted to bring up, which was, if there's anyone looking for any contact from our team on how they could use this Webhook connector, let us know. This poll is going to be something that will kind of be able to gauge, one, the content of the session today, but then also be able to gauge specifically and individually who needs to be reached out to and who would like to have a conversation about bringing something like the solution we saw today to life in their own instance. I do want to call out, as everyone's filling out this poll, that the Webhook connector that we saw today is a workflow step. Therefore, it's a workflow exclusive connector only available inside the Atlas plans, or if you're on the classic version, obviously the team and above. So that will exclude plans like the Essentials and Basic. However, we do have similar connectors in the HTTPS connector if you'd like to approach something. And if so, this Webhook connector is always a great starting point for a conversation around other plans if you haven't had that yet. By no means is the expectation ever that you have to upgrade, but the expectation is that an upgrade would come with additional impact and benefit. Oftentimes that Webhook connector and workflow connectors being one of the biggest benefits of those other plans. I'll go ahead and jump over to that poll while I give everybody a quick sec to get those last minute answers in. But I also want to shift over to any questions and hopefully be able to give everybody an extra minute or two back in their afternoon, morning, or whatever time you're joining us in. But as I run through the questions really quick, and then of course, Tom, if there were any questions you saw that you wanted to highlight, answer, or just mention here, feel free to cut me off. But it looks like what we're seeing a lot of is questions about specific types of content that can be sent over. So again, I know that files were mentioned, and I do want to point out that when it comes to interacting with files, there's also the Google Drive connector and the Microsoft SharePoint connector, as well as a few others that have the intention of saying, hey, you've captured a file, where does this file need to live? But there are options within the Webhook connector to utilize URLs that reference back to the hosting inside Form Assembly that initiate immediate download. So if the goal of any approach would be, I'm collecting files, how can I get those somewhere via Webhook? Let's talk. Definitely going to be something worth approaching without saying for certain that we can do it how you need. I definitely see a few other questions that I'd want to follow up more individually. Just again, probably deserve a little more time than I'd be able to provide, and maybe even a little more knowledge than I'd be able to provide at this moment. So we'll probably be able to give a few minutes back to everybody But I want to give a big thank you to everyone that joined us today. I know it's not always easy to carve out time for some additional knowledge and growth, but hopefully this was impactful and hopefully it was worth the time carved out. And it's always great to get a chance to connect with Form Assembly customers. Without further ado, unless there's any closing remarks, Tom, I think we'll hit the fireworks and confetti.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you very much, Justin. Appreciate everyone's time today. And any questions that we haven't actually answered yet, we'll follow up and give you some information that way. So appreciate the time.
Thanks again, everyone. Stick around for more sessions.